The Competitive Enterprise Institute seems to get lots of money, 10 million from Donors Trust and Donors Capital, 400,000 from Koch organizations. Its president became Donors Trust's president. The Hamilton Lincoln Law Institute got at least $1.25 million in litigation grants from Donors Trust.
Senator traces every employer on a judicial nominee's resume back to the Koch political operation, then asks, "How will you handle cases involving your funders?" Sheldon Whitehouse follows the money. Millions from Koch networks, Leonard Leo's machine, and identity laundering through Donors Trust, forcing nominees to confront whether they can be impartial when they're essentially a product of their investment.
I believe we agree that when local law enforcement roll up to a crime scene and find, for instance, a cartridge in the sidewalk, the quicker that those local police officers can identify the firearm that left that cartridge, that leaves distinctive markings on a cartridge, the better off they are, and that can both help officer safety and investigative effectiveness. Is that correct?
Good morning, Senator. Thank you for your time yesterday. And yes, you are correct. You're referring to NIBIN, the National Integrated Ballistics Information Network.
Yep. I look forward to working with you on trying to make sure that the database is robust as possible and that access to the information is as quick as possible. In a crime scene at night on a street, you want to know as quickly as you can where that came from. And so I'm glad that we agree on that and look forward to making further progress. Ms. St. John, it looks to me like pretty much every one of your employers has been funded by the Koch political operation. By that, I spell it K-O-C-H. Leonard Leo's political and judicial influence operation, or Donors Trust, which is kind of the identity laundering operation for the Koch brothers and others. Given that, how are you going to deal with cases that come before you in which, let's say, the Kochs have an interest? Would you recuse yourself? You seem to be essentially a product of their investment, and now you'll be making decisions that could affect their business.
Senator,
or their politics.
My current organization, Hamilton Lincoln Law Institute, does not receive any funding from the Koch brothers. I've never received any indication I need to do any work consistent with their wishes to the extent they were a donor to any organization I've ever been a part of. And as to recusal, I would carefully look at each case and look at the relevant factors for recusal.
Well, the Competitive Enterprise Institute seems to get lots of money, 10 million from Donors Trust and Donors Capital, 400,000 from Koch organizations. Its president became Donors Trust's president. The Hamilton Lincoln Law Institute got at least $1.25 million in litigation grants from Donors Trust. Independent Women's Forum, $300K from Leonard Leo's Judicial Education Project, more than $13 million from Donors Trust. So if you think that that's not something that you need to be concerned about as a judge, all that history, then I'm very disappointed to hear that. Mr. Davis, how about qui tam cases? You say they're unconstitutional. A qui tam case comes before you. Are you going to recuse yourself based on your stated opinion that that cause of action should not exist?
Senator, in a capacity not as a nominee, I spoke about qui tam actions. However, there's binding en banc precedent in the Fifth Circuit. If a qui tam case came before me, I would follow that binding circuit precedent.
Yeah, but there's obviously a certain amount of lien in judicial decisions. You're not automatons out there. How would you convince a qui tam plaintiff that you're not going to lean in every subordinate decision along the way against that party's interest because of your expressed views on qui tam?
Senator, in the past, I offered views on one aspect, which was the constitutionality. That is something I have spoken publicly on. But as a nominee and as a judge, if I were so lucky as to be confirmed, I would follow the law faithfully. I would follow all.
Yeah, I get
precedent
that. I
faithfully.
get that. I get that. But I've also been a lawyer for a long time now and know a lot of judges, spent a lot of time in court. And anybody who spent a minute in court knows that the judge is not an automaton. And everything from procedural rulings to scheduling rulings to undecided elements of a case allows the judge very substantial leeway. And if you're not prepared to listen to a qui tam plaintiff fairly because you think they're there unconstitutionally, that's something that you should consider as a judge, shouldn't it, you?
Senator, I disagree that I could not listen to them fairly.
You've said that the cases would be unconstitutional.
Senator, if I were so lucky as to be confirmed, I would follow all precedent, and that includes precedent in the Fifth Circuit that makes clear that qui tam actions are constitutional. I would follow that fully and faithfully.
Yeah, right. My time's up.
Senator Sheldon Whitehouse's questioning of judicial nominees exposes a fundamental problem in the federal judiciary: the systematic capture of judicial appointments by political operations, with clear financial and ideological stakes in the outcomes of cases those judges will decide. Whitehouse doesn't traffic in vague allegations. He presents receipts. His questioning of Miss St. John and Mr. Davis is methodical, evidence-based, and deeply troubling, revealing how dark money networks have transformed judicial nominations into investments with expected returns. Whitehouse begins by establishing common ground with Mr. Sakata on ballistics tracing technology, a practical, nonpartisan discussion about helping law enforcement solve crimes faster. This sets a baseline of reasonableness before Whitehouse shifts to judicial conflicts of interest. The contrast is deliberate. Governance can work when focused on solving problems rather than serving donors. Then Whitehouse turns to Miss St. John, and the receipts begin. He notes that pretty much every one of your employers has been funded by the Koch political operation. He references Leonard Leo's judicial influence operation and Donors Trust, which he describes as the identity laundering operation for the Koch brothers and others. This language is precise and damning. Identity laundering accurately describes how Donors Trust obscures funding sources, allowing wealthy donors to influence judicial appointments without public accountability. Whitehouse's question is straightforward. How are you going to deal with cases in which the Kochs have an interest? Would you recuse yourself? You seem to be essentially a product of their investment, and now you'll be making decisions that could affect their business or their politics. This is the core problem. St. John is not being nominated because of independent judicial excellence, but because she has been cultivated, funded, and positioned by a political network with specific policy goals. St. John's response is evasive. She claims her current organization doesn't receive Koch funding, and she's never been directed to advance Koch interests. But Whitehouse is ready. He lists the funding. Competitive Enterprise Institute received $10 million from Donors Trust and Donors Capital, plus $400,000 from Koch organizations. Hamilton Lincoln Law Institute received at least $1.25 million from Donors Trust. Independent Women's Forum received $300,000 from Leonard Leo's Judicial Education Project, and more than $13 million from Donors Trust. Whitehouse's conclusion is blunt. If you think that's not something you need to be concerned about as a judge, all that history, then I'm very disappointed. The problem isn't that St. John once worked for a Koch-funded organization. It's that her entire professional career has been underwritten by the same political network, and she shows no recognition this creates a serious conflict. Whitehouse then turns to Mr. Davis, who has publicly stated that qui tam cases, lawsuits brought by whistleblowers to recover fraud, are unconstitutional. Whitehouse asks whether Davis will recuse himself from qui tam cases. Davis responds he would follow Fifth Circuit precedent holding qui tam actions constitutional. But Whitehouse presses further, challenging the idea that judges are automatons who mechanically apply precedent. There's obviously a certain amount of lean in judicial decisions. You're not automatons out there. Whitehouse says, procedural rulings, scheduling decisions, and unresolved legal questions give judges very substantial leeway. If Davis believes qui tam plaintiffs are there unconstitutionally, how can he convince them he will listen fairly? Davis insists he would follow precedent faithfully, but Whitehouse cuts through the platitude. I've been a lawyer for a long time and know a lot of judges. Anybody who spent a minute in court knows that the judge is not an automaton. This is the critical insight. Judicial decision-making involves discretion, interpretation, and judgment at every stage. A judge who believes a cause of action is unconstitutional will inevitably approach cases differently than one who believes it is valid. Whitehouse's questioning reveals a judiciary increasingly populated by individuals whose careers have been funded and shaped by political operations with specific agendas. These nominees offer reassurances about impartiality, but their professional histories tell a different story. When every employer traces back to the same billionaire-funded network, your claim to independence rings hollow. This is not about ideology. It's about institutional capture. The federal judiciary is being stocked with judges who are products of political investment, and those investors expect returns.